If you've never experienced the kind of silence that settles over a 40-acre farm at 5 a.m., the kind of stillness that makes your coffee taste stronger and your regrets about buying property in the middle of nowhere feel a little less stupid, well, you're missing out. I'm Detective Sarah Chun, though out here in the wilds of unincorporated farmland, most folks just call me that city lady with too many chickens. After 15 years of unraveling the worst humanity had to offer, corruption, arson, conspiracy, and one guy who genuinely believed his microwave was stealing his thoughts, I'd had enough. Urban chaos? Been there. Shot at that. I traded my badge, well, temporarily, for barn boots and bought the old Henderson place. The listing described it as a charming vintage farmhouse with character. Translation: the plumbing dated back to Prohibition, the barn looked like it was one stiff breeze away from achieving airborne status, and I was pretty sure the attic had a raccoon named Frank who paid no rent and left his trash everywhere. But it was mine. I imagined a simpler life. You know, sunrises over golden fields, fresh eggs, maybe learning to make jam without accidentally setting the kitchen on fire. And for the first 6 months, despite the aggressive learning curve that is farm maintenance, it kind of worked. The chickens? Dramatic little cluck bombs. I had 12 hens and 2 roosters, all with names, attitudes, and a deeply personal vendetta against my sleep schedule. The garden? Flourishing, if you consider mutant zucchinis the size of toddlers a win. And my neighbors? Sparse, polite, and refreshingly nosy in that, we'll help you fix your fence, but we're also watching everything you do kind of way. Mrs. Patterson, who lived about half a mile down the dusty road, had taken it upon herself to become my unsolicited farm mentor. She brought me eggs when mine went on strike, left cryptic notes about moon planting cycles, and once handed me a jar of medicinal honey, with a wink that made me deeply uncomfortable. But bless her goats, they were frequent escape artists, and after helping her corral them 3 times, we were basically family. Life was calm, quiet, and just unpredictable enough to keep me entertained. Then came her. I was in my garden, well, more accurately, in combat with what I suspect was a tomato plant possessed by the spirit of an angry hydra, when I heard it. The unmistakable crunch of expensive tires on gravel. Slow, hesitant, the kind of careful driving that screams, I've never been off pavement, and I'm already regretting it. I turned just in time to see a white BMW SUV approach, glossy and painfully out of place against the dusty backdrop of weathered fence posts and a rusting wheelbarrow that doubled as a chicken perch. The vehicle stopped abruptly, like the dirt might leap up and ruin her undercarriage on principle. Out stepped a woman who could only be described as aggressively manicured. Designer leggings that had never touched gym equipment, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and the infamous haircut, sharp, precise, and screaming. I will absolutely speak to your manager, your supervisor, and probably your dog if I'm not satisfied. She stood at the edge of my driveway like it might bite her, hands on her hips, surveying the farm like she was personally offended by the existence of dirt. The breeze caught her perfume, something floral, synthetic, and about 3 miles too fancy for chicken country. I took off my gloves, wiped my hands on my jeans, and approached with the calm composure of someone who'd once talked a bank robber into surrendering using nothing but sarcasm and a half-eaten granola bar. "Can I help you?" I asked, offering a dirt-smudged hand. She looked at it the way one might look at a dead rat on a salad bar. "I'm Madison Whitfield," she said, like I was supposed to curtsy. "I represent the Meadowbrook Heights community." Meadowbrook Heights. I blinked. There was nothing out here except fields, more fields, and a suspiciously aggressive turkey 2 miles south. Unless Korn had started organizing HOAs, something wasn't adding up. "I'm sorry," I said, trying very hard to keep the smirk out of my voice. "I wasn't aware there was a community out here." Madison's smile could have been used to refrigerate meat. "It's a new development. Premium homes, starting in the low 7 figures. We're revitalizing the area." Revitalizing. That was rich. The land had been alive and well for generations before her McMansion invasion. But sure, come bulldoze some history and slap luxury living on top. That'll definitely add culture. Well, Welcome to the neighborhood, I said, making a mental note to add another lock to my tool shed. What brings you out this way? She glanced at the chickens, nose wrinkling like they were personally offensive. Actually, there are several things we need to address regarding your establishment. Establishment? I nearly choked on a laugh. This is a farm, I said, gesturing to the coop, the compost pile, and the goat chewing on an old broom like it owed him money. Yes, and therein lies the issue, she said, pulling out her phone with the flourish of someone preparing evidence for trial. Your property is negatively impacting our community's standards. Community standards? I echoed, half certain this was a prank. Ma'am, your community is 10 miles away, at best, and it sounds like it only just crawled out of escrow. Her lips tightened. Our residents have concerns. About noise. About smell. About visuals. Ah yes, the classic complaint trifecta. Sound, scent, and scenery. God forbid her son see a cow and develop a dangerous appreciation for agriculture. I crossed my arms, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make it awkward. You moved next to a farm, I said finally. What exactly did you think we did out here? Knit lavender-scented dreams and hum lullabies to the wildlife. Her eyes narrowed. This area is changing. People like us are bringing sophistication to rural living. People like you, I repeated, biting back a laugh. You mean the ones who build 6-bedroom fortresses on cornfields and then cry when they realize Wi-Fi isn't a guaranteed right past mile marker 12? Madison huffed, offended that her Botox investment wasn't intimidating me. I came here in good faith, she said. I hoped we could find an amicable solution. I smiled, showing teeth. And I'm just brimming with faith. But you're going to want to buckle up, Madison. Rural folks don't take kindly to outsiders telling them what color their livestock should be. And just like that, the tone had shifted from polite curiosity to a territorial standoff. A city cop versus a suburban Karen with delusions of grandeur. Game on. Now, I've interrogated bank robbers, talked down armed suspects, and once negotiated a peaceful surrender with a guy who thought his toaster was the reincarnation of his mother. But none of that quite prepared me for a conversation with Madison Whitfield. You see, Karen, Madison, wasn't just a suburban transplant with a superiority complex. No. She was a self-appointed ambassador of her half-born neighborhood, ready to lead her imaginary HOA crusade against the local wildlife, the concept of manure, and, most recently, me. I represent Meadowbrook Heights, she said again, now clutching a manila folder like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. And we've been getting complaints. From the deer? I asked. Or the cows? Her smile twitched. From concerned residents. She emphasized, as though the echo of that capital R might magically summon them to her defense. I glanced behind her at the dust trail her beamer had kicked up. No houses, no people, just prairie dogs judging us from the tall grass. Huh. Must have missed the memo on your bustling metropolis. Undeterred, she stepped forward, her perfume wafting toward me in waves of aggressive lilac and poor decisions. There are community standards that must be upheld. I raised an eyebrow. Out here? The only community standard I know is don't shoot at the mail truck unless it actually bites you. She laughed politely, like someone pretending not to be offended by your entire existence. I'm here to work with you. To create synergy between our spaces. Oh, synergy. The word corporate people use when they're about to take your stapler and sell your soul. I'm all ears, I said, motioning to my porch swing. Let's synergize. She sat carefully, as though the wood might be contagious. I stayed standing. It felt important to maintain the high ground, both physically and spiritually. Madison cleared her throat with the drama of someone about to declare war. First item. Your roosters. I blinked. What about them? They crow. They're roosters. That's sort of their whole thing. Her jaw tightened. It's disruptive. One of our residents reported being woken up at 5:13 a.m. I almost asked if the rooster had come with a stopwatch, but I restrained myself. You realize you built houses in the middle of farmland, right? I said. We weren't exactly hiding. My chickens have been here longer than your plumbing. She waved a hand like she was swatting away logic. Be that as it may, You could consider removing the roosters. Or at the very least, investing in one of those noise-suppressing coops. I stared at her. You want me to soundproof a chicken? Yes, she said earnestly. For community harmony. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Next concern? The smell. Of course. Chicken manure is pungent. We have small children in our development. Again, I said slowly. You moved next to a farm. We have animals. Animals poop. That's kind of how nature works. Madison leaned in like she was sharing state secrets. But the smell, Ms. Chun. It's organic. No kidding, I deadpanned. You should see what we do with the flies. She looked genuinely horrified. We also noticed your compost pile is quite close to the road. That's the west fence line. The wind keeps it downwind. I'm not exactly flinging it onto passing cars. I've taken the liberty of drafting a few friendly suggestions, she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her folder. Ah, the infamous list. I could practically smell the scented ink. Lay it on me, I said, resting a hand on the fence post like I was preparing for battle. Which, to be fair, I kind of was. First, she read, all livestock activities should be limited to the hours of 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. to respect sleeping schedules. I squinted at her. Do you think the chickens wear watches? They don't even know what daylight saving time is. Second, she continued without missing a beat, manure storage should be relocated to the furthest edge of your property. That's 3 miles west. You want me to start a daily poop pilgrimage? She nodded brightly. It would show goodwill. I stared. I have a better idea. Why don't you relocate your noses further east? Madison didn't laugh. Karens rarely do when you joke outside their comfort zone of HOA bylaws and hummus recipes. Third, she said, clearly undeterred, we suggest transitioning your agricultural model to something more visually harmonious. Organic herbs, maybe, or decorative succulents. I nearly laughed. So you're saying ditch the chickens and start a Pinterest garden? Exactly, she said, as though I'd finally understood my place in her suburban utopia. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch again. It's a skill you learn as a detective. How to say more with no words than you could with a monologue. Finally, I said, Madison, I bought this farm to escape people like you. And I say that with the deepest respect for your matching yoga ensemble. She stiffened. You don't have to be rude. Oh, I haven't started being rude, I said with a smile. But I am saying no to your suggestions. Her eyes narrowed. Then you leave me no choice. Let me guess, I said. You're going to call someone. She stood, folder clutched to her chest like a shield. We have connections. Legal resources. Influence. Ah, there it was. The veiled threat. The suburban battle cry. I nodded solemnly. Well, I have goats. And an alibi. As she marched back to her vehicle, I realized something important. Madison didn't come here to negotiate. She came to win. To bend the world to her very particular, rose-scented will. And unfortunately for her, I've got 15 years of experience dealing with manipulators, narcissists, and people who think rules only apply to other people. She may have come in peace, but she was about to leave in pieces. Now, you'd think after Madison's charm offensive crashed and burned like a sugar-free marshmallow in a campfire, she'd regroup, maybe rethink her approach. Maybe even consult someone who knows the difference between zoning law and a yoga pose. But no, Karen logic doesn't work like that. 3 days later, she returned. Same BMW, same sunglasses, though now she wore a lemon-colored blouse that looked like it had been personally ironed by anxiety itself. This time, she wasn't alone. Her husband was with her, a tall, balding man with the demeanor of someone who spent more time yelling at interns than understanding where food came from. I was mending a fence post, boots muddy and hands greasy, when I saw their luxury barge rolling like it was afraid the gravel might be contagious. Madison stepped out, waving a piece of paper like a peace treaty written by a tyrant. Ms. Chun, she called, we're here to find a solution. A final one. Well, that escalated quickly. Her husband lingered behind her, wearing loafers wholly unqualified for uneven terrain and an expression of strained tolerance, like he'd just found out his country club revoked their shrimp cocktail privileges. I walked over slowly, making a point of not putting down my hammer. Back so soon, I said, cocking an eyebrow. Did the HOA Emergency Council demand a summit? Madison didn't rise to the sarcasm. She was focused, serious. That meant she was either about to cry or file paperwork. Possibly both. This is a formal proposal, she said, unfolding a multi-page document with the reverence of a royal decree. It outlines the adjustments we expect you to make to align with Meadowbrook Heights' evolving vision. Evolving vision. Corporate nonsense for we want to pretend the farm we moved next to doesn't exist. I took the paper without taking my eyes off her. Let me guess. More rules about the noises, smells, and color coordination of my livestock. Madison sniffed. This is about community integrity. I began reading. It was impressive. And by impressive, I mean a ridiculous Frankenstein's monster of buzzwords, legalese, and wishful thinking. Page 1. All roosters to be removed from the property by the end of the month. Page 2. All farm operations to cease between 8 p.m. and 10 a.m., including feeding, watering, and any audible engagement with animals. Page 3. Compost must be relocated to a minimum of 2 miles from any Meadowbrook Heights structure. Page 4. Transition of farming practices from livestock to aesthetic horticulture, such as topiary, ornamental herbs, or koi ponds. Page 5. A strongly worded request that I consider repainting my barn in a less aggressive shade of red. I looked up at them slowly. So just to recap, you want me to fire my roosters, rehouse my compost, shut down my farm for 14 hours a day, turn my barn into a Zen garden, and give up actual farming for ornamental kale? Madison clasped her hands like a school principal about to deliver a suspension. It's really the only sensible path forward. Her husband finally spoke. His voice was smooth, like it had been professionally trained in the art of smugness. We believe in progress, he said. This area has potential, but frankly, your operation is a visual and auditory affront to modern development. An auditory affront. To whom? The squirrels? I folded the paper slowly, handed it back with equal care, and said, Tell you what, why don't you take this back to your community and use it for what it's worth? Maybe line a compost bin with it. Oh, wait, you wanted me to move those. Madison's smile twitched. Miss Chun, we're trying to avoid conflict. Funny, I replied, because this feels exactly like conflict. The kind where someone shows up uninvited and tries to redecorate your life with legalese and entitlement. Her husband stepped forward, doing his best big man stance. We're not threatening you. Could have fooled me. He tried again. But if you choose not to comply, we'll be forced to take action. Our legal team is standing by. The county has rules. Zoning boards. Health inspectors. Do I need to go on? There it was. The velvet-gloved punch. The typical Karen playbook. Get told no, cry foul, and weaponize bureaucracy like it's a blunt instrument. I crossed my arms. Go on. I'm curious what you think you can do to an agriculturally zoned, legally grandfathered property that's been operating within code since 1847. They exchanged glances. I've done my research, I added, just in case they missed the part where I used to investigate fraud for a living. I've read every zoning regulation in this county, every setback requirement, every noise ordinance. You don't even have an active HOA. That means you're just concerned citizens. Loud ones. With a printer. Madison's face went tight. We were hoping you'd be reasonable. And I was hoping for a pony when I was 6. We don't always get what we want. Her husband's jaw flexed. You don't want to go down this path, Miss Chun. We're very well connected. I smiled. That's adorable. You think I'm scared of your connections? Honey, I've been screamed at by congressmen with cocaine in their glove compartments. I'm not exactly trembling. Madison clutched her folder like it could protect her from reason. You'll regret this. I leaned in slightly. Maybe, but you'll regret underestimating me even more. They stormed off, kicking up dust and indignation in equal measure. As they peeled out of my driveway, I turned back toward the coop, where one of my roosters let out a defiant crow, as if to say, bring it on. I scratched his head. Don't worry, buddy, I muttered. War's coming. And they brought a spreadsheet to a pitchfork fight. Some people get the hint after being told no. Madison wasn't one of them. 3 days after her barn-red meltdown and her husband's failed, connected attempt at intimidation, I got the first official whiff of what I can only describe as full-on Karen retaliation. And by whiff, I mean the scent of bureaucracy burning my time like dry hay in August. It started small. A mysterious envelope arrived in my mailbox, unmarked except for the county seal. Inside, a notification of potential health violation regarding livestock management. No details, no specific complaints, just vague government jargon and the gentle suggestion that I ensure compliance with county health standards for animal waste and water runoff. A lesser person might have panicked. I just sighed and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. That same afternoon, I received a voicemail from someone at the county zoning office asking for clarification on my commercial agricultural activities. That's right. Now my 40-acre homestead was being investigated for possibly running a full-scale farming empire out of my back pocket. By day 3, it became a game. A painfully irritating, paperwork-filled game. Let me introduce you to the parade of professionals that followed. First came Jerry, from the county health department. Jerry looked like a man who'd rather be fishing. He arrived in a faded pickup with a clipboard that had definitely seen some stuff. "Sorry to bother you," he said, taking off his cap and squinting at me. "Got a call about livestock waste being improperly handled?" I raised an eyebrow. "They make it sound like I'm pouring chicken poop into the well." Jerry snorted. "Wouldn't be the first time someone made that claim. But I'll just take a quick look around." I gave him the grand tour. My composting setup, the manure management system, which was cleaner than some restaurants I'd visited, and even the storage shed where I kept bagged fertilizer for garden use. He jotted notes, nodded approvingly, and muttered, "This is cleaner than my cousin's kitchen." He left with a fresh dozen eggs and a deep resentment for whoever had wasted his Thursday morning. 2 days later, Rebecca from county planning. Neat blouse, steel demeanor, and the sense of humor of a brick. She was here to investigate commercial operations violating residential code. I smiled. "Did Madison send you?" Rebecca blinked. "Excuse me. Never mind. You want zoning documentation." 10 minutes later, she was flipping through permits, so old the ink looked sunburned. My farm had more legal backing than her department had pens. "This is agriculturally zoned land," she said finally. "Has been since the 1800s. These complaints, they're frivolous." "Frivolous," I echoed. "That's putting it mildly. You should see her HOA declaration." Rebecca gave me a long look. "There's no HOA on record." "Exactly," I said. "But that hasn't stopped her from pretending." Then came the big guns. Not figuratively. Though if Madison had gotten her hands on a cannon, I wouldn't have been shocked. No, this time it was Agent Martinez from the State Environmental Agency. They don't show up unless someone cries chemical warfare. Martinez, a soft-spoken man with calloused hands and a PhD-level understanding of soil, arrived with a full testing kit and a look of deep annoyance. "I'm here following up on a report of pesticide misuse and chemical runoff affecting nearby residential zones," he said. I blinked. "You mean the tomato patch?" He surveyed the area. "How many acres under crop?" "About 1. The rest is pasture and chicken rotation." He visibly relaxed. "Mind if I run a few tests?" I handed him my organic certification. "Be my guest." An hour later, he was shaking his head. "Your soil's cleaner than half the lawns in suburbia." Someone wasted a lot of time reporting this. Someone with too much time, Alexis, and a fake homeowners association. Martinez paused. "There's a development nearby?" I chuckled. "Depends on your definition of development. 7 houses, a broken promise of luxury, and 1 Karen with delusions of regulation." He chuckled too, which felt like a victory. After he left, I poured myself a bourbon and sat on the porch watching the sun slide behind the hills. It had officially escalated. Madison had traded polite threats for legal harassment, and she wasn't even doing a good job hiding it. That night, I pulled out my laptop. Time to dust off some old skills. 15 years as a detective leaves you with certain instincts. When someone's bluffing, when someone's hiding something, and most importantly, when someone's vulnerable to being unmasked. A few calls to old colleagues. Some very legal database inquiries. A friendly chat with the county clerk. And what did I find? Madison's community was a failed development built on the husk of an abandoned farm. The builder had gone bankrupt mid-project, leaving behind overpriced houses with cracked driveways and broken promises. And the HOA didn't exist at all. She had no authority, no backing, just a clipboard, a husband with a sketchy past, and a god complex the size of Texas. Even better, her husband's law firm, Whitfield, Morrison and Associates, hadn't existed in 3 years. The guy was disbarred for mishandling funds and currently worked out of a strip mall, selling insurance and poorly veiled threats. Suddenly, it all made sense. She'd moved into a fantasy world, paid luxury prices for farmland-adjacent property, realized she'd been duped, and decided I was the problem. Well, time to remind her that detectives don't scare easily, and they don't lose quietly. I'll say this much for Madison, she's tenacious. Unfortunately for her, so is a raccoon in a garbage can, and I've chased those off with more dignity. True to her word, or rather, her warning veiled as a threat, the phone calls didn't stop. The agencies kept coming, like a parade of bureaucrats led by a marching band of mild confusion. All of them polite, all of them sheepish, and all of them, to a person, eventually realizing that the only thing hazardous on my farm was Madison's delusions. The first visitor after Agent Martinez was from the State Agriculture Department, a young guy named Tony who looked like he'd just aged 5 years over the drive alone. He knocked on my door like he was bracing for impact. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, clipboard trembling like a leaf. "I know this is dumb. We got a call. Something about unlicensed livestock breeding operations." I nearly spat my coffee. What does that even mean? Like a rooster dating ring? Tony flushed. The wording was dramatic, but I can already tell this is bogus. I gave him the usual tour. He scribbled a few notes, snapped a picture of my license. Perfectly valid. Thank you. And by the end, he was petting one of the goats and asking if we ever did farm tours for kids. The day after Tony's visit, I got a call, not a person this time, from the county's business regulation office. "Hi, Ms. Chun. We had a report that you're operating an unregistered retail business from your property." I blinked. "You mean the egg cooler on my porch with a $5/dozen sign and an honor box?" "Yes," the woman on the phone said hesitantly. "We were told you're managing significant commercial traffic." I looked at my dirt driveway, where the most significant traffic was a squirrel doing laps around my mailbox. "Let me be clear," I said. "I'm not shipping eggs to Whole Foods. I sell a couple dozen a week to neighbors who understand the concept of free range and can tell the difference between yolk and yellow paint." She sighed. I figured. "Sorry about the call. We're required to follow up." "No worries," I said. "Just curious. Did the complaint come from a woman named Madison Whitfield, by chance?" Pause. "I'm not technically allowed to say. So that's a yes." Another pause. "Let's just say it's not the first complaint we've received from that zip code. About chickens." It was becoming a pattern. One phone call, one visit, one failed attempt at catching me doing, well, anything wrong. And each time, I added another piece to the file I'd started compiling on Madison. Yep, I'd built a file. Physical folder. Color-coded tabs. Printouts. I was a detective again, and my case was unfolding beautifully. At this point, it wasn't about chickens anymore. Madison had stepped way over the line from entitled neighbor into criminal harasser. And every department she dragged into her vendetta was leaving a trail of receipts right back to her doorstep. The funny thing? She was making it so easy. After the 5th agency visit, I decided to up my game. I wasn't just going to defend my land. I was going to expose hers. I called in a favor from Maria, a no-nonsense friend over in real estate fraud enforcement. If anyone knew the red flags of phony homeowner associations and shady land use, it was her. "Maria," I said, "I've got a woman claiming to run an HOA that doesn't exist, enforcing rules that aren't real, and threatening me with legal action based on zoning regulations she clearly doesn't understand." Maria chuckled. "You want me to be impressed or concerned? I want to know if impersonating an HOA rep counts as fraud." "It does," she said, immediately serious. especially if she's using that false authority to harass, intimidate, or manipulate property owners. I gave her a brief rundown. She whistled. You might want to file something formal. That's bordering on felony territory. Music to my ears. Then I called Steve over at the county prosecutor's office. Good guy, smart, once arrested his own brother-in-law for fishing without a license and never let him forget it. Steve, I said, hypothetically, what happens if someone makes a bunch of false complaints to public offices to mess with a neighbor? Hypothetically, he asked, suspicious already. You got a name? Just thinking out loud. But say someone made 7, maybe 8, completely baseless reports. Health, zoning, environmental. All targeting one farm. He sighed. That's criminal misuse of government resources. Possibly harassment. Definitely a pain in the ass. Hypothetically. Of course. We laughed. But I was dead serious. The final straw came when a drone buzzed my property. Yep, a drone. I was watering tomatoes when I heard the faint buzzing, looked up, and saw it. A sleek, black consumer drone hovering about 10 feet above my barn, camera pointed directly at my chicken coop like it was filming a Netflix documentary. The Feathered Menace. One woman's war on property values. I didn't panic. I didn't even throw a rock. I just smiled, went inside, and got out my own camera. Click, click, zoom. 10 minutes later, I had photos, timestamps, and one hell of a digital paper trail. The drone zipped back toward the west, over the line that separated my land from the glorified ghost town known as Meadowbrook Heights. I made a note, added the drone to my file, and emailed Maria again. Hey, I wrote, add illegal drone surveillance to the list. She replied with a gif of popcorn popping. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a full-on campaign of psychological warfare, waged with complaints, drones, and pure Karen energy. Madison thought she was making me uncomfortable. What she didn't realize was that she was giving me evidence. Piles of it. Enough to choke her HOA fantasy twice over. The storm was coming. And for once, it wasn't the chickens that were about to raise hell. Detectives aren't made in police academies. They're forged in endless hours of pattern recognition, caffeine, and paperwork. And after a week of Madison's parade of nonsense, I was fully back in the saddle. This time with a mission that required less Kevlar and more creative Google searches. Let's be honest, most people wouldn't bother. They'd grit their teeth, call a lawyer, or maybe just move away. But I'm not most people. I'm Sarah Chun. I once tracked down a money laundering ring based on a guy's tattoo and a misprinted receipt. So when a passive-aggressive suburbanite tried to evict me from my legally zoned farm using phantom ordinances and imaginary HOA authority, I made coffee. I made copies. And then I made her my next case. Step 1. Dig into Meadowbrook Heights. Now, when Madison first told me about her luxury development, bringing sophistication to the area, I had assumed it was at least semi-legit. Shady, sure, but it had to be something. Oh, sweet summer Sarah. So naive. The entire community of Meadowbrook Heights consisted of 7 homes. 7. That's it. No clubhouse. No playground. No security gate. No tennis courts. Not even a sad little gazebo. Just a cul-de-sac and broken promises. Apparently, it had started as a much larger project, a master-planned community designed to bring urban luxury to rustic living. The developer had run out of funding halfway through Phase 1, right around the time they realized rural land doesn't appreciate like beachfront property in Miami. How do I know that? Because I called the county clerk's office, asked for all development filings related to Meadowbrook Heights, and got a 48-page PDF that painted a picture so bleak it should have come with its own country song. Half the lots were unsold. The developer had declared bankruptcy. The original marketing materials promised everything from fiber optic internet to exclusive community bylaws. Spoiler alert, none of those things existed. Then came the HOA, or, more accurately, the complete lack thereof. I combed through the property records, business filings, and land use agreements. Nada. No homeowners association registered with the county. No board of directors. No charter. No legal structure. No dues. The HOA Madison had so lovingly referenced. Completely fictitious. It was a fiction she had built brick by entitled brick, and apparently she'd convinced a few of her fellow residents that she was some kind of land baron in athleisure. But Madison wasn't just pretending to be in charge. She was using that fake authority to try to rewrite the world around her. That's not annoying. That's illegal. See, impersonating a legal entity for personal gain, or to harass someone, is called fraudulent misrepresentation. And in her case, it wasn't even subtle. She drafted fake ordinances, claimed non-existent jurisdiction, filed official complaints under a name that had zero legal backing. She'd crafted an entire suburban fantasy world, and I'd just walked into it like the uninvited NPC with livestock. I added it all to the folder. Every complaint, every agency report, every zoning map and screenshot, every quote where she used the phrase community standards like it was the holy scripture of suburbia. Then I dug into her husband. Mr. Whitfield, the stern, balding man with loafers and threats. He'd claimed to be a partner at Whitfield, Morrison and Associates, which sounded impressive enough. Except the firm had been dissolved 3 years ago. Turns out partner is hard to maintain when your law license has been revoked for embezzlement and fiduciary misconduct. Apparently, Mr. Whitfield had helped himself to the retirement accounts of a few unfortunate clients, and the state bar took a dim view of that. These days, he was running a fly-by-night consulting service out of a rented office between a vape shop and a nail salon. Translation: he had as much legal authority as a magic 8-ball and probably half the credibility. Suddenly, the power couple's behavior made perfect sense. They were frauds. Not the clever kind either, just entitled and embittered grifters who bought into a fantasy, watched it collapse, and decided to blame the chickens. Now here's the part Madison didn't anticipate. I wasn't just collecting evidence to defend myself. I was preparing to prosecute. See, when you file repeated false reports with government agencies, that's not just a nuisance. It's a crime. And when you use a fake organization to do it, that's called impersonation of a public official. If you claim HOA authority that doesn't exist, send letters with fake bylaws, and try to coerce someone into changing their property usage, that's harassment, fraud, and civil liability, all wrapped up in a neat little indictment package. I ran everything past Steve at the prosecutor's office. "This is solid," he said after flipping through the folder. "It's stupid, but it's also criminal. I can bring this up the chain." Then I pinged Maria. "Confirmed," she texted back. "You've got at least 3 misdemeanor violations here. Maybe more depending on intent." I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Madison had come at me with buzzwords, fake bylaws, and intimidation tactics. I was coming back with the law. Actual law. The kind written in dusty books and enforced by people with court-issued coffee cups. But before I made my move, I needed her to go one step further. One final overreach. One final tantrum. And oh, did she deliver? Like a blessing from the bureaucratic gods, Madison made the single biggest mistake of her entire little crusade. She called 911. They say never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity. But with Madison, it was definitely both. It happened on a Thursday, one of those glorious rural mornings where the sun hits just right, and the only thing louder than the birds is the rooster named Clarence declaring war on a wheelbarrow. I was mending a split fence post near the southern pasture when I noticed something odd. Silence. Too much silence. And then, the sirens. I straightened up slowly as the sound rolled closer. Fast. First came a sheriff's cruiser, lights spinning. Then another. Then, because subtlety had officially left the chat, an ambulance and a fire truck. They tore up my driveway like the chickens had started cooking meth in the barn. Dust everywhere. Lights flashing. Radio squawking. Out stepped Deputy Mike Williams, boots dusty, eyebrows already halfway up his forehead. "Sarah," he called, "we got a report of gunshots. Domestic dispute. Possible hostage situation." I blinked. Hostage situation? Mike looked around at the peaceful farm. The goats were napping. The hens were pecking at a watermelon rind. My dog was asleep on my porch like someone had unplugged him. "Caller said they saw someone with a weapon," he added. "Claimed someone was being threatened." I squinted toward the road. And there she was. Madison. parked at the end of the driveway like the villain in a straight-to-Netflix courtroom drama, phone still in hand, sunglasses perched like sniper scopes on her Botoxed face. "Let me guess," I said. "The witness was driving a BMW and a superiority complex?" Mike sighed. "Anonymous call. But yeah, we got a call back from a Madison Whitfield." "Of course we did." I took a slow breath and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Would you like to see my badge?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "Your badge?" I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my old detective shield. Detective Sarah Chun. Metro PD. On leave, not retired. Current status, officially pissed. The second deputy, Martinez, gave me a slow, incredulous look, then pulled out his notebook. Madison, to her credit, looked absolutely thrilled with herself for about 10 seconds. The second I flashed my badge and walked toward her, that smug expression cracked. It was like watching a Botox statue melt in real time. "Ms. Whitfield," I called cheerfully, "so good to see you again. Would you like to explain why you called 911 with a completely fabricated report of a violent crime?" She blanched. I was just concerned. I heard shouting. I thought someone was in danger. I turned to Mike. "You hear me shout this morning?" He shook his head. "You were singing to your tomatoes again." "Classic hostage behavior," I said. "Tomatoes are needy." Martinez had already begun recording the scene. Camera clipped to his vest, red light blinking. "Ms. Whitfield," he said evenly, "you're aware that filing a false police report is a criminal offense." Madison's voice rose an octave. "I didn't file a report. I just made a call. I thought something might be wrong." I folded my arms. "You didn't think to maybe, I don't know, knock on the door? Call me directly? Or maybe not manufacture a crisis?" She looked trapped, spinning emotionally like a possum in a cul-de-sac. "I just wanted to protect the community." "What community?" Deputy Martinez asked, flipping through his notes. "You mean the 7-house subdivision with no registered HOA and 5 empty lots?" Madison turned scarlet. "We're building something real." "Oh, you built something," I said sweetly. "Mostly lies." Mike finally stepped in. "Sarah, you want to press charges?" I handed him the folder I'd brought with me. Thick, tabbed, beautiful. "Let's start with this. Harassment, impersonation of a public official, misuse of emergency services, and I'm happy to throw in a civil suit for good measure." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "You built a case file?" "I'm a detective," I said. "We love evidence, especially when the perpetrator gift wraps it with a monogrammed drone and scented paper." Madison sputtered. "You can't do this. I was just trying to uphold standards." Mike sighed. "Ma'am, you're being detained for questioning. Let's talk about what standards you violated." They read her rights. Not an arrest yet, but certainly not a tea party either. And she was escorted to the cruiser while the fire truck turned around awkwardly in my goat pen. The paramedics looked supremely annoyed. "I brought coffee," I offered. "God bless you," one of them muttered. As Madison sat in the back seat, staring through the window with the cold fury of a Karen denied her refund, I walked up and tapped the glass. "You wanted the law involved?" I said, leaning in. "Well, here it is." She didn't respond, which was fine, because for once, she'd finally shut up. Justice isn't always swift. Sometimes it shows up wearing scuffed boots and carrying a clipboard. But when it does finally roll in, oh, it's glorious. After her 911 stunt, Madison spent 4 uncomfortable hours at the sheriff's station. Not under arrest, technically, just helping with inquiries. By the time they were done inquiring, she was paler than skim milk and about as stable. See, while Madison was explaining away her little false report, something about confusing a tomato for a gun, don't ask, Deputy Martinez and Mike were flipping through my lovingly curated evidence file. The drone footage, the complaint history, the fake HOA letters signed with her very serious cursive. It read like a masterclass in entitled lunacy. Martinez called me the next day. "Sarah," he said, "we're moving forward with charges. County attorney agrees. Harassment, misuse of emergency services, and impersonation of a legal entity." I smiled so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Any chance she gets community service pulling weeds on a real farm? We'll see what the judge thinks of irony. Oh, the judge. Let me tell you about Judge Hendricks, retired Army, allergic to nonsense, and the proud owner of 3 alpacas. I'd once seen him fine a developer for trying to reroute a stream through a graveyard. He didn't suffer fools or Karens. In court, Madison tried everything. Tears, confusion, that shrill mix of panic and self-importance that only kicks in when people realize they're not in charge. Her defense? She was deeply concerned about rural crime and only acting in the community's interest. Her husband, who showed up wearing a suit from 1998 in moral bankruptcy from birth, tried to argue she was exercising her civic duty. Hendricks was not impressed. He stared her down over his glasses and said, "Ms. Whitfield, your civic duty does not include wasting taxpayer resources, harassing your neighbor, or impersonating a non-existent HOA. Your subdivision has 7 houses and a Facebook group. That is not jurisdiction. That is a group chat." The courtroom laughed. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. Madison was sentenced to 150 hours of community service, which, in a stroke of poetic brilliance, she served cleaning up the county fairgrounds, surrounded by chickens, goats, and the kind of manure she tried to banish. A $3,000 fine for misuse of emergency resources, and mandatory attendance in a civic responsibility workshop, which was basically a group therapy circle for people who think rules don't apply to them. Oh, and one more thing. The judge ordered her to issue a formal, public apology to me, which had to be posted on the very same Meadowbrook Heights community board she used to send out her fake bylaws. It was exquisite. "I was misinformed," she wrote, "and I deeply regret the disruption I caused to Ms. Chun and the community. Her farm is a legally protected, essential part of our rural landscape. I acted out of frustration, not malice, and I will work to rebuild trust with my neighbors." Sure, Madison. Tell that to the drone. Her husband tried to threaten me with a civil countersuit. I smiled, handed him a copy of his disbarment record, and reminded him that libel works both ways. He walked out of that conversation with less dignity than a soaked cat. As for the residents of Meadowbrook Heights, turns out most of them weren't bad people, just buyers who'd been sold a dream wrapped in vinyl siding. Once Madison was legally defanged, a few even stopped by my farm. "Sorry about her," one woman said, handing me a pie. She kind of went rogue. "Understandable," I said, accepting the offering. Chickens have that effect on some people. They started buying eggs. 2 families even offered to help expand my garden project for the local food bank. One guy offered to install solar panels on my barn as an apology to the farming gods. So yeah, things got better. Madison eventually moved. Last I heard, she ended up in a gated community back in the suburbs where the HOA was real, and reportedly not as thrilled with her leadership qualities as she'd hoped. And me? Still here. Still farming. Still getting woken up by Clarence the rooster, who crows like he's auditioning for American Idol, Poultry Edition. But now, I do it with peace of mind. Because I stood my ground. Because I didn't let the system get weaponized against me. And because sometimes, just sometimes, a badge and a barn are all you need to outweed a Karen. So the next time someone with a clipboard and a condescending smile tells you to quiet your chickens or repaint your barn to suit their aesthetic, don't panic. Smile, brew some coffee, and remember, it's not just your land. It's your story. And if they're lucky, they'll only end up in the footnotes. If they're not, they might just get a starring role. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.